Noah, get the boat. That's what we're talking about today as we continue our sermon series called Ordinary Sinners. We're seeing how God works through ordinary sinners. And this sermon series is all about the heroes of the faith, the heroes in the Bible, Adam and Eve, Noah, Saul, all these people, Peter, that are heroes in the faith, that we look at them with such reverence and revere, and we think, man, God chooses the righteous. But what's funny is when we look at these stories in reality, we find out that these people may not have been all that righteous. And what we end up seeing is that God works through them anyway, that God can work for you and me, even though we can be very ordinary, right? God works through ordinary sinners. So for today, we're going through the story of Noah. And this is one of those things that I probably know a little bit too much about. For those of you who don't know, in college, I had to write a dissertation about something in the Old Testament, and I chose the rainbow, all right? I wrote a 12-page paper on the rainbow. One of my favorite memes that's around right now is this one that says, "Noah, get the boat." And I love it because it always follows, like there'll be some just absolute bonkers story in the papers or in the news, something like that, about somebody doing something so terrible that it just shows that, finally the straw has broken on the back of God, that the humanity is just a lost cause anymore. And someone always will flash up this meme and say, "Noah, get the boat." And that meme's funny because I think we all kind of understand where it's coming from. I think there's something deep inside of us that really understands that, man, if we could just clean up this place a little bit, things would just run so much smoother, be so much better. If we could just get rid of the baddies, then, oh my goodness, our lives would just be eternal bliss, right? But is it true? Before that, we really want to talk about what the story of Noah and the flood, what's going on in it. At the beginning of the story, it's filled with absolute bonkers stories. Renowned men of old, sons of gods and daughters of men, and like all these things. It's the Watchmen, the Nephilim, and all that stuff. Absolute bonkers stuff. It's talking about a time that was kind of pre-diluvian, is what we call it, pre-flood. And it's kind of setting up this world that has just gone completely bonkers, just a mess. And God is kind of sad that He has created all of this. It says this, "And God saw that the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, 'Get the boat,'" right? "I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them, and with them the earth. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood." All right, so he gets Noah. He finds like the one righteous dude, right? Noah and his family. He's like, "Oh, we're going to use you, Noah. This is all done. We're going to have to mess it all up and just get rid of it. We need to start over. Like all those things, got to get rid of all the baddies to make this world into a better place," right? And so he builds this giant ark, and God has him bring like 2 of every animal onto the ark, and comes onto there, and he gives them the dimensions for the ark. All that stuff doesn't really matter, at least I don't think it does all that much. But what really matters is if you look at the grand scale of the ark and what it would have looked like, it would have looked like a giant floating coffin, which is interesting on its own right. I'm not going to go into that, but a giant floating coffin all over the flooded earth. And it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Now that's important for the Gospels and other things that happen. 40 is an important number, and that's important for us to remember, but we're not talking about that today. And so that happens, and then it stops raining, and they float around what I think is about 150 days. Noah sends out some birds. First it's a raven, then he finally sends out a dove, and the dove doesn't come back. The dove means peace. Again, there's another 40 and a dove at the beginning of the Gospels. Maybe they're talking about similar things. I don't know. And so he sends out a dove, and it doesn't come back, and they decide to disembark from the ark, and they go out there, and Noah ends up making a sacrifice to God, and God finds it all pleasing, and God sends his rainbow into the sky, and then Noah gets drunk. No, seriously, Noah got drunk. But we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But before that, I want to talk about the flood and why is that story even in the Bible? Is it because, it happened and we just have to talk about it? There's a lot of things that happen in Bible times, but they're not necessarily written down. Like, why was this one written down? Is it because it's so catastrophic? Maybe, but generally in the Bible, it's telling us something about God and how he relates to his people and how we relate to God. So why is this story in the Bible? Because I think it exists around that idea that I think a lot of times gets into our head where we say, man, if I could just get rid of those people in my life, then everything would be hunky-dunky. Like, can you imagine how much better this country would be if we could just get rid of that other political party? Can you imagine how much better our neighborhoods would be if we could finally just round up all of the criminals and all the things and just get rid of them? Just go ahead and kill them. We could live in a utopia, right? Can you imagine how much better anything would be if we could just get rid of the baddies? Have you ever thought about that? Have you? I think a lot of people have been thinking about that more and more recently. People they want to get rid of folks, and they think that if they just get rid of them, that things will get better. But that brings us to the story of the flood. Because at first blush, it seems that the story of the flood is that God agrees with you. Because after all, God looked over the world and he goes, oh boy, there's just a bunch of sinners down there. This is no good. We got to do something to get rid of that. But there is one that is still righteous down there. Noah. Yeah, Noah, you're the good one. You're the one lone good one down there, Noah. We're going to save you and your family. God says, I'm going to get rid of all the baddies, and it's going to make the world so much better with the one true righteous one, Noah. But let's be honest with ourselves here. What would happen if we truly found all the baddies? All the bad people out there. What would happen if we found them and finally just got rid of them? The one core group of people that are finally righteous. Wouldn't someone in that core group of people, wouldn't they do something to upset us? Wouldn't they do something bad? Oh, well, then we'd have to just get rid of them. And I think we'd end up finding all the bad ones all around us until the one true righteous one was still remaining there above in glorious righteousness all by themselves, right? And who would that be? That'd be me, right? That'd be you. I think if we whittle down all the unrighteous all around us, that we would end up with just one left. And that's me. No one's righteous except for me. And I think you guys understand what I'm doing there. It's not me. It's all you too, right? Like that's is what we say about ourselves, is that I'm the one righteous one. I think C.S. Lewis picks up on this idea in his book, The Great Divorce, is that is how he understands hell. Is that you don't have to get along with anybody. You get your way all the time. And that's hell. So I think we can understand that about ourselves, that we are not all that righteous and all that. But Noah was a different story, right? Well, this is, I think, the brilliance of how God inspires his scriptures, is that the way Noah gets presented at the end of the story, it's very odd. It's weird because Noah was like the one righteous one. His family was like the good ones, right? Well, let's look at the story here at the end of Noah. And I'm just going to read it. It's chapter 9, verse 20. I'm just going to read it, and we'll talk about it just a little bit later. But I want you to see the weirdness in there. Pay attention, okay? So Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. And he drank of the wine and became drunk, and lay uncovered in his tent. Oh man. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and walked backwards and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backwards, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine, and he knew what his younger son had done, he said, "Cursed be Canaan. A servant of servants shall be his brothers." Cursed be Canaan? Like, what's going on? This is such a weird story. Like, God comes in and they're saved and all those things, but Noah ends up planting a vineyard and gets drunk, passes out naked in his tent, and then his son sees him and it causes a curse to happen? Listen, we don't know what happened, but what we do know is that whatever happened caused enough anger and turbulence that even Ham's brothers knew that something wrong happened, so much so it talks about them walking backwards, that there was something so heinous that happened that it causes curse that ripples throughout time. This doesn't sound like the peak righteousness, right? And I kind of think we start seeing the point of the story in that. Is that oftentimes we believe that if we just could get rid of the baddies in our lives, then finally we would be able to get some reprieve from this. But it's almost like God, the author of the scriptures, is saying, nah, we tried that. And it ended in curses. We tried that and it just didn't work. Why do you think it would work this time? So what's up with this story then? There just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of hope in it. Doesn't seem to be a whole lot that we can really take for ourselves and go forward. And I think that's where we start seeing the story of the rainbow in there. The story that's part of the covenant that God makes with his people so that we can see that he won't destroy the world again. He gives us the covenant of the rainbow, but it doesn't actually called a rainbow. That's something that we put on it because, it happens around the rain and all that stuff. It actually calls it a bow. Like a bow and arrow bow. It's one of those, and it's used in other parts of the scripture to talk about like someone with a bow in their hands and when like a bow and arrow. So what's up with God's bow then? What's up with that? How does that have to do with anything? Well, it actually has to do with shaking hands. Do you guys know where the tradition of shaking hands came from? Because it's kind of an odd thing that we do. We haven't done it much in the last year and a half. It was actually like medieval times when we would shake people's hands. But the reason why we would shake it is most people fight with their swords with their right hand. So they would fight with their right hand. So what they would do is if you were shaking somebody's hand, if you were shaking their hand, that would mean that you weren't going to grab your sword and just start hacking them all up to pieces and stuff like that. So a shaking of hands meant as a sign of peace. Now, what would a sign be of peace that was equivalent to that Bronze Age era when they're like dealing with bows and arrows and all that stuff? Well, what they would do is they would hold their bow out, But normally where the string would be on this side, the string would be on this side, and it would be as if the bow was pointing to them, and how it was almost like being fired at them. They would hold it out, and so they would hold out their bows as a sign of peace that said that I am not going to fire on you. I'm not going to shoot you. Isn't it interesting that in Genesis chapter 9, when it talks about the bow in the sky, it's talking about a bow. And if you think about it and how it's shaped across the sky, it's almost like God is hanging out as a sign of peace. But what is a bow? What is a sword? What is a cross, right? But they are these things that are implements of death and destruction, these things of warfare, these things that are meant to get rid of the baddies in our lives, the people that we cannot stand anymore. Bows, swords, crosses, guns, right there. They are there to get rid of other people that we don't like. And what we end up seeing with the sign of the bow is that God has it pointed at himself as a sign of peace. And we see that same sign with the cross of Jesus. Is that he took on the implement of death as a covenant of peace that would envelop us all, that said that we don't have to worry about death anymore because he conquered death on that cross and rose again. And if you think I'm crazy, I mean, St. Peter in his letters that we just went over just a little bit ago, they also tell us about this same thing where he compares the death of ourselves in the waters of the flood. That we drown in the waters of our baptism, much like the world was drowned in the flood, and that now God takes on that drowning in the cross. And we rise out of the waters in new life of the resurrection, knowing that God has conquered death and the grave. The story of the flood, I think, confronts all of our beliefs about how we think we need to handle evil in the world. But it shows us the beginnings of the story about how God deals with the baddies. How he doesn't come to deal with the baddies outside of us, but how he comes to deal with the baddies inside of us, where God takes on the implements of our death and our destruction, and he takes them onto himself to bring about life and peace to each and every one of us. So when we're tempted to look around at the world and we see all this stuff, the stuff that we cannot stand, it's like, I can't believe we're having to live with any of this stuff. And we're so tempted to yell out, Noah, it's time to get the boat. Just remember what the rainbow means, what the bow means, is that God isn't about going and getting the boat to destroy all the creation again, but instead the instrument of death went on to him with the bow, that went on to him with the cross, so that he could raise again and give us all that new life, so he could bring forgiveness to us, so that we then, having that forgiveness and that life in us, when we encounter people that we're just like, oh, I can't stand them, I don't know how to be with them, we can look at what Jesus has done for us and we can go, I can forgive them like Christ has forgiven me. And so we won't yell, Noah, get the boat, we need to destroy it all. But instead we can seek communion, peace, and reconciliation in this world as the kingdom of God is coming in it now. And you know what? I think that's good news. And we'll end right there. You guys all have a great week.